a farmer, he mused, taking Osrith's hand. Do you know much about farming? Not much, Osrith had laughed. But I can learn. And Domhnall kissed her, drawing him to her, and putting his mouth on hers. They broke off after a moment, and then both descended into fits of childish giggling. It's no good, Domhnall told her, unable to conceal an uneasy smile. It's not right, with you. I know, Osrith agreed, and let him pull her to his chest and put his arms around her. And she would have had him stay, like the times they were together, hiding from something or other, and just talking. True, honest friends. It would be like that until death. But that was a long way off yet, in a different time, and a different place. You're going? Asked Osrith, plaintively, as Domhnall moved to the window. You can't have the door unlocked by me in the morning if I'm on the other side of it. He glanced to the dress. You are going to look beautiful, he added. And, when Domhnall reached the window, he added, undo the rope, and I'll take it away. You were never out of your tower, Princess. 88,888,888. And it was after the door opening ceremony, and the walk to the chapel. It was after the brief exchange of looks between her and the King of Alba, and the vows and the hand-tying, and the swearing of fealty to one another. The ale and the usbetha had not been the best thing to have the night before, with a lack of sleep, but, as Osrith had concluded before, weddings were not determined by the bride and the groom, but those around them, putting things into place. Edra, such an image of her mother that Osrith thought it was Thyra, walked just behind her as Constantine took her arm to the chapel's priest, and young Finan, supposedly also behind her, had looked up at his mother. He had slipped a hand into hers, reluctant to let go as the vows were said, and was allowed to stand by her, as if reminding Sained Ui Alpin that it was young Finan's mother he was marrying. A ceremony. I am no maid, Osrith had said to Sened, once they had spoken about it, when they had returned to Dunnottar after Corbridge, both by different routes. Constantine had apparently been in discussion with Sained about the events, and had left him to tell Osrith. It is how the king wishes it to be done, how it is done in our family. And yours, I understand. Then, like now, Sained drew her to him, supporting her back as he leaned over her. He pressed his lips to hers, gently, and Osrith shivered. It was no secret she was attracted to Sened, but had never opened her mind to it. Now, the world quieted, the birds stopped singing, the sun stopped moving its way across the sky. It was just Osrith and Sened, they were joined, and she shivered. And so there was feasting, and toasts to the house of Bridi of Pitland and Ida of the Angles, and food from the harvest and wine. As the evening became night, and singing became music, which became dancing, Osrith felt that she really could not be happier. She did love Sained, she did want to be his wife in all things. The land was midway between Bibbenberg and the Forth, at Berwick, apt, she considered, for a union of Pict and Angle. Unliebe, a voice came, out of the singing and the dancing and the merriment. Osrith, in her form-fitting dress and her hand on her husband's, almost missed the call. Elasade had told her about the tradition, and at the call of the bed, both the bride and the groom had to run off, and away from the pursuing wedding party, who were trying to get them together. If they managed to find their way to one another without help from their pursuers, they could go, unhindered, to their bed. If not, they had to be escorted, and the bedding in witnessed by the victors. So much for, I have never been seen having sex. Now, she was at the back of the stables, contemplating the ledge onto which she would have to reach to be out of the chase. The guests, Osrith could hear, were not far away, at the back of the kitchens. Down, and she would be in the armory. Osrith knew Sained would make his way there, assuming he hadn't been caught. He wouldn't have been, she knew. Osrith reckoned herself to be over 50, which made Sained in his early 60s. But age belied his agility. He had bettered dozens of Ragnall's Norse half his age at Corbridge. Osrith, are you here? Sained crept into the armory, barring the door, glancing down at the wet trail from her boots. Osrith put her hands to her face, trying to suppress a laugh. The chase by Domhnall, Angus, feel him to get them together had caused her heart to beat quickly, and it hammered in her chest. The man who was most important to her had found her, Sainid, her husband, and she watched him bolt the door behind him. "Osrith, it's me," Sainid called. He looked at the rafters, and beside the bridlery, behind the screen where the brushes were kept. And Osrith looked at her husband, a man she had known for 40 years, his black hair to his shoulders, long, lean nose, sharp blue eyes, a lithe, strong body, and realized that, while she did not love him as she loved Finan, with heart that ached, with stomach that pained, she cared for him deeply. Sainid had never once let her down. He had been a man everyone could turn. He had carried out every duty without ever a complaint. And Osrith knew he wanted her, and had restrained himself, had never taken advantage of her, not once. "Osrith," he looked up, because she could not help giggling, laughing, with the happiness that any bride should feel on her wedding day. Sainid looked up, drawing a slow smile across his face, amused, and out his hands to his hips. "There you are," he said to her, as Osrith laughed again. "Come down then." Edra has taken them a merry dance around the castle. And Osrith climbed over the beam and down to the loft level, before climbing down the ladder. Sainid watched her with amusement. "Your beautiful dress is wet," he told her, as he out a hand to shoulder. "Look, you need to." And it was Osrith kissing Sainid now, her husband. A man in whose arms she felt safe. She pressed her lips to his, and he gathered his arms around her, pulling at the shoulder straps of the dress, so it came down her arms. Goosebumps raised on her skin, but it was not the cold, and Sainid rubbed her arms with his hands, not stopping as his eyes lit over her ancient injuries. Osrith stopped kissing him as he stroked her naked back and, because he stopped touching her for a moment, she knew Sainid was looking at the scars, worse than ever she had suffered by Grioghair's hand, at Ethelwold's hand, at Uthod's. But then he kissed her again, and eased down the rest of her dress, so that Osrith stood before him, naked, and he took a step back and looked at his wife. And then Sainid took his cloak and threw it around her shoulders, gathering her to him, and just then a crunch of boots on stone drew his glance, and a rattling of the stable door. Osrith giggled into his shoulder as the banging came again, and Sainid took Osrith's hand and drew her to the back of the stables. "Sainid, are you in there?" Domhnall's voice came through the gaps between the oak. "Sainid, come out. We need to bed you." And at this, Sainid drew Osrith to him, for she was shaking with laughter, and when they heard his footsteps leave she drew away from him and saw his face, as he half laughed, half gasped at the hilarity of it all, in his happiness, in his joy. With a swift tug at the hand Osrith broke her grasp, and tore off up the steps to the hail loft, laughing at escaping from him again, and she sat above as he took the ladder 2 rungs at a time. This time, Osrith put out her hand, allowing Sainid's cloak to fall from her. Everything that her body told, her life on her flesh, was visible to him, and Sainid looked over her, until he took 2 steps towards her, and stopped. Then he began to take off his own clothes, jerkin, shirt, and then boots, until he standing in just his leather breeches which he unlaced and allowed to fall down to his ankles. Osrith had never seen a man standing fully naked before her, and Sainid was a sight to behold. A good 10 years older than her, there was not a single ounce of excess flesh, and every muscle in his body was defined, from a lifetime of physical activity. But he was not hard, not in the least, and Osrith wondered whether she should take the initiative. As she was considering the how, the decision was taken from her, for Sainid stepped over the tufts of hay and stood in front of Osrith, taking her face in his hands. Gently, slowly, he placed his lips on hers, and Osrith drew her hands around his back, placing her fingers on his ribs, moving them up and down, and was surprised when she felt a stirring by her leg. Just from the kiss, just from her touch. And Sainid continued to kiss Osrith, moving his lips down her neck, to her collarbone, and to Osrith. All the time in the world had been given to them for that purpose. She let out a sigh, deep, and out of time to her own breathing. Just Sainid's kiss was turning her on, and she moved her feet to regain her balance as a fluttering feeling came around her hips and down the outside of her thighs. Already? How can just her husband's kiss have got her so far already? It seemed it had got that far for him too, and Osrith glanced down and saw not an unsizable cock pressing against her thigh. She put out her hand, but Sainid took it in his and drew her touch away. Not yet, he told her, and to emphasize the face, he leaned down and drew his arm under her knees, taking a few steps to the hay pile, and placed her down in it. Osrith wriggled a little, and Sainid kissed her, before leaning away from her for a moment, and looking into her eyes. I love you, Osrith, and always have. We can stop here, now, if you wish. We can just lie beside one another. When Osrith had said nothing, for her mind was too crowded with thoughts, Sainid added, if you do not wish me to go too far, then, but Osrith put a finger to his mouth, before pulling it away and replacing it with her mouth. I can no longer bear children, Sainid, she told him. I do not know whether this displeases you or not. I would not like you to become ill again, Osrith, he told her, gently. You nearly died last time. I want you, for the rest of my life. I would die before you, Osrith, because I could not bear a day without you in the world. Living being my wife. I do not need you to have my children to prove you are my wife. He touched her hair, braided expertly by Elasad, tangling his fingers into the plaits and combing out some of her hair. And then there were no more words. Words were replaced with kisses, were replaced with Sainid's embrace of her, pulling her close, so their flesh, at the chest, at the stomach, arms, hands, were touching. Osrith did not know if there was any order to what he was doing, as he touched her breasts, gently at first, and then with more vigor, squeezing them, and he kissed her face and neck again, and the shivering in her lower body increased by measure, until she was sure that just her husband's kiss would make her come. Sainid's hand then travelled to her legs, and very slowly trailed up a hand, until he reached her cunt. But Osrith was too far on to need the encouragement that the pushing of her clitoris would achieve. Sainid arched his back as Osrith kissed his neck, and plunged on. They became one, as if they were meant to be. He was good, he was very good. And, as they slept in the hay until the next morning arrived, Osrith knew that, for once in her life, she had done the right thing. She was married into the Ui Alpin family now, and was going to be a farmer. And Sainid, her husband, could do that to her every night for the rest of their lives.